Are you a successful IT professional and need help optimizing your compensation plan, navigating your taxes, investments, and protection? It's time to rewire and retire with Mike. Listen in as Mike gets you the answers you need to move forward. Now, on to the show with Mike.
Hello and welcome to Rewire and Retire with Mike Guarino. Mike, what's going on?
Eric, I'm doing well, buddy. How are you?
I'm dreading winter, but that's just me. The older I get, the colder I get. I think that's a saying. I'm not sure. It's just whatever. But it's always warm in your presence.
Oh, I'm follically challenged, they say.
Follically challenged?
I don't have any hair, Eric, on the top of my head. So
I've seen you, but you're a handsome bald man.
Thanks. I use Lubriderm every day.
I'm a turtle wax man myself.
But it does get cold fast when you don't have anything on the top of your head to keep you warm. So I am not a winter person either. Yeah,
I shave my head every once in a while. I like my hair short normally because it's curly, and so it just gets out of control, and I just get tired of it, so I just shave it all off. And when I do that in the winter, it's a shock to the system. It's like, I used to have a carpet up there that kept me warm, and then I just shave that off, and then I have to suffer for a little while. It's interesting to see the steam rise off my head, though. When I'm shoveling snow or whatever, and then I take my hat off. It's just weird.
Yeah, that just happens to me when I'm thinking.
Oh, nice. Is it steam or smoke?
Yeah. I'm not allowed to say.
Okay, so
it's probably smoke.
Yeah, well, you should cut down. Anyway,
I'm going to cut down on thinking. No, that's not good. I'm not cutting down on thinking.
True. I was just talking about the smoking aspect.
Okay. No, I don't smoke.
No, I know you don't. You're okay. Smarter than that. No offense to anybody who is smoking right now listening to this podcast. Speaking of the podcast, let's do this.
Yes, sir.
Because we're in part 2, right? We're part 2 of a 2-parter. In part 1, you talked about 5 things to do 5 years before you retire. Can you give the audience just a brief recap of those 5 things so we can get to part 2 today?
Yes, thank you. And if you recall, estimate your monthly income that you'll need was the first thing you should be doing 5 years before you retire. And then we kind of graduate into determine whether you'll stay in your existing home or if you'll make a move. Mm-hmm. Then we talk about debt and taxes. I don't want to go into too much detail on these, Eric, but debt and taxes are very important to consider before you're ready to hang it up permanently at work, right?
Uh-huh.
Get a good glimpse of what your healthcare costs would be. That would be number 4. And then the 5th one that we went over last time was imagine what your ideal retirement looks like. So what these all have in common, and again, the key word in that is 5 things to do before, right? You retire, right? 5 years before you retire. So, and that's the interesting part. So now we're going to kind of put on the thinking cap to say like, okay, those are the 5 things I did 5 years before I retired. I took a look at them. I reviewed them, blah, blah, blah. I worked with my advisor. Hopefully I got this all ironed out. But then you get to a point, and the 5 years before you retire part is called accumulation mode. And we talked about that last time. Mm-hmm. Accumulation mode. I'm working. My wife is working. We have income coming in. And we're accumulating assets. Hopefully we're putting in stuff in the 401ks, saving on the side. Whatever we're doing, we're bringing stuff through the door. Today's podcast talks about, okay, I'm retired now. And I just had this happen with a bunch of people I used to work with. They had, for better or for worse, they came around and they announced early retirement packages for people. And they were able to take advantage of it. And believe me when I tell you, we did a lot of number crunching for a bunch of individuals.
I bet.
Because what do they want to know? What do you think the one thing they wanted to know was?
Oh, well, will I have enough? Right? With this package, will I have enough to actually retire and do it now? And we spoke about on the last podcast that if you retire early, which that's what you're talking about, is they're offered a little bit of early retirement, you may be losing your health care that you had through your company, and Medicare certainly isn't starting quite yet. So there's a gap there, and there's so many things to consider, Mike.
Yeah, good memory, by the way, and you hit it right on the head. So there are a lot of things to consider. So now again, put your thinking cap on. You've sat down, you met with your advisor. They said, okay, it looks good. The numbers look good. You can retire. Tell your wife she can retire. So now you both pull the trigger. You're retired now for the first time. The numbers look good. The projections look good. You're comfortable. You're confident. And it's clear. You have a clear trajectory. But now you shift gears into distribution mode. And that's the difference. We work our lives. We get to making up a number, 60, 65, and we decide to hang it up. You've gone from accumulation mode to distribution mode. No longer are assets coming through the door. We got to be good people with, good investors and prudent with the money that we have to shell out the door now. So now the distribution part of it kicks in. I always tell my clients to look at it like, I think it was Sisyphus, right? The guy in mythology that would push the boulder up the hill, and it would roll down. I would always say that's accumulation mode. You're pushing this boulder over the hill. Then finally you get to the top. You get to that pinnacle and you just give it that last little push. And now it's going down the other side. Welcome to distribution mode. So there's a lot of things I want to cover here. Speaking about when you're taking your money out, Eric.
Okay. All right. So we're talking about distribution mode. And I'm going to use your analogy, right? I've been pushing this boulder. I've got it to the top of the hill. You said just give it that one little push, and now it's going downhill for the time of distribution. That's a little scary to me because that's a big runaway boulder, right? That sucker's moving.
It could be.
It could be. And so I don't want it to go down too fast, right? I think that's kind of the analogy I'm looking at here. What's the first thing that you do with me or for me as my advisor to help me with this situation? I've given that boulder the last push, and there she goes.
I talk to a lot of advisors. A lot of my friends are advisors, and everybody has a different take on this. But the first thing that we do is we take your financial plan, and hopefully you've had one, because that's the thing that showed us 5 years ago that you could retire now. And the plan takes a little bit of a tweak. It no longer becomes an accumulation-based plan. It's a distribution-based plan. And with that comes with an alignment of your assets that's different from what you had pre-retirement, if you will. So, pre-retirement, you probably have your 401k, you probably have some money you saved up, and that's great, and you're contributing to those, etc. Now we're not doing that anymore. So how do you position your assets? How do you position your investments so that you don't have to really worry about big volatile swings in the market really ruining your retirement? Because that's why you have plans and you create contingencies. What we do is we take this approach here at Guarino Wealth Management, where we take your assets and we use very sophisticated software, believe me, and we kind of slice it in time frames, and we look at every 5-year time frame in your retirement as a block, right? And I think we talked last time about the the go-go, the slow-go, and the no-go years for retirement, right?
Yep.
This is heading into the go-go years, right? You retired and you want to take that cruise that you've always, pushed off. Or
it's time to celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we want to do is make sure that the spending is in place for that. So our first bucket, if you will, our first 5-year chunk of your assets, we use a technique that puts that into very conservative things. Why would we do that, Eric? Why do you think we would put your first 5 years of spending for retirement in conservative investments?
Well, I've been working with you for a while. I know exactly why you want to do it, because I'm going to be using that money in the next 5 years, and it still needs to be there.
Right. And then we take the rest of your assets and we kind of time them out, like I said, in 5-year chunks after that. So you have a 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20 buckets, if you will, right? Different resources we're going to use at different times. And that's been really, really instrumental in our ability to keep people on track in retirement, because there were black swan events, right? We hit one this year, COVID-19. God forbid anybody retired right before that. Your portfolio could have taken a 20, 30% hit. You're like, oh my God, I'm in distribution, but I got to start taking money out of this and it's down so much. But if you work with someone who does retirement income planning, they would have probably had a bucket of money for you for that first 5 years that didn't really experience the volatility that the market did. And that's the whole idea behind it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And we've talked about this before. We talked about this before.
We have.
Because this is, in specifically in one of the podcasts, we talked about the fact that when you do this and put this in place for your clients, there's this collective sigh of relief, right? Because they know, okay, I'm not worried about what's going to happen in the next 5 years because I've got that money set aside. I know my living expenses are taken care of. I know that the fun things that I want to do in my go-go years are still going to be able to be done, when they lift travel bans, of course. But for them, it was peace of mind.
Right. Yeah. And my whole point is it looks good on paper, right? When you walk out of here with a retirement income plan, it looks good on paper, believe me. The reports are cool. It looks really neat. But the reality is what you just said. When you are retired and you have this volatility, someone's going to say, oh my gosh, Mike, the stuff that we're living off of these first 5 years in retirement, that didn't move around a lot. And you look at them dead in the eye and you go, it's by design.
Yep.
And that's the whole thing. In distribution mode, you have to have a plan. It should shift gears from accumulation to distribution. Sure, we're still trying to grow the assets. Don't get me wrong. But we have to do it in a pragmatic way that allows us to take care of 0 to 5 year spending out of the gate and let the other stuff ride. And if you could picture each bucket or each basket or each different investment beyond that first 5 years as being a little bit more aggressive, and the next 5 years is a little more aggressive, and the next 5 years is a little more aggressive. So you have this series of things that are coming due, if you will, to become that first bucket, that become liquid assets at designated points in time.
Yeah.
Is it a foolproof thing? No. But does it help people understand a process? Yes. Is it something we strive to adhere to for people? Without a doubt. So it's very instrumental. I know we've talked about it before, but the reason I'm bringing it up now is because we just had this big downturn in the market. And you can argue whether it's a V-shaped recovery, square root recovery, or no recovery at all. It doesn't matter. What matters is, had you have done this technique and saw the lack of volatility in that portfolio for your 0 to 5 years, I think you'd be a happy camper. And that's really what I want to get across to the listeners. If you are on that other side of the hill, you're in that distribution mode, talk to your advisor about changing up your strategy if you think it makes sense. If they're not going to do it for you, if you don't have an advisor to do it for you, please give me a call. I'd be more than happy to spend a half hour with you to tell you how we can help. We can start mapping things out for you to show you how it looks. Eric, if you can hear it in my voice, I have a ton of confidence in our process.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, here's the thing is I just keep thinking about those numbers that you're talking about. And you've got, so 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, 20 to 25. Let's say there's 4 or 5 of these suckers, right? Or silos, buckets, whatever you want to call them. Just think about the fact that somebody that retired in the year 2000, right? If they retired in the year 2000 using your system, using or they were part of your team. I know that you weren't exactly practicing in 2000, were you? Does it go back to 2000?
No.
Yeah. You weren't at that point. But let's say they did, right? All the volatility that they faced in 2008, 2009, the tech bubble, early 2000s, the COVID, that bucket that was 20 to 25 years out, it's still sitting there, and it has gone up and it's gone down, and it's gone up and it's gone down, but it never affected their daily living because they had these other sections in place. And so I think that's the beauty of it. And as it trickles down to these other time frames and it maybe becomes more conservative, as you've described, I love that. I think it's phenomenal.
That's right. I'm so glad we did this because I really don't worry about what I see going on in the markets every day. And I'm like, that's exactly what you should be doing. You shouldn't be worrying about what's going on. That's my job as your advisor, is to worry about that. It's my job. It's like when you're building, a house or a building or anything. First of all, you have a plan, then you get the right team involved to build it, and then you get, everybody to coordinate their efforts to get the end result that you want. You want that nice house with the, granite floors or whatnot. There's a lot of collaboration that goes in on that. That's the same thing with your retirement income plan. There's a lot of design and blueprinting that goes into it and mapping it out and then making it the way you want it. And of course it's flexible. Don't get me wrong. Don't think it's like I built this building and no, it doesn't sway when it's windy. No, it has the ability to adapt and lean. My point is, going through this process with people that are just newly retired, I know because we lived through, like you said, I wasn't around for 2000, but we lived through 2008. Believe me, we lived through that. That was ugly. We lived through the other sell-off we just had recently at the end of 2018, the tech sell-off at the very end of the year, right? We lived through COVID. My point is, the retirement income planning that you do you have to see it to believe it. But once you see it, it's so pragmatic, it makes so much sense.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question, because you actually, you framed it up perfectly when you were talking about the 5-year sections, right? 0 to 5 years, so on and so forth. So what happens if, and this is perfect for my own life, except for the fact that I'm not retired. But let's say I had retired 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
My son was nice enough to bless us in the last 5 years with 3 grandchildren. So that changes some things, because we've talked about, what's your budget going to be? What are you going to be spending in retirement? Well, now my retirement spending, because my wife went absolutely bananas with grandkids, has changed. So how do you address something like that when you've got the 5 years of money in the conservative fund or not fund, but in the conservative bucket, and then you've got these other sections? What happens if I need to increase my spending?
Yeah. So hopefully, Eric, I don't get together with you every 5 years after your family has grown significantly. We're talking, right? We're talking, every quarter, or a couple times a year, whatever schedule you want. But the idea is that there's no surprises. And look, there's going to be years where you have really good years in the market, and there's going to be years where you have really bad years in the market, and there's going to be years where you did okay in the market, right? So the technique or the art with this, because, we really didn't talk about that, and thank you for setting up so nicely for me. There's an art to it as well. Now, here's what I'm getting at. We already talked about our short-term spending in that first 5-year investment strategy, right? What do you do when you had let's just say during those first bunch of years where your grandchildren were being born, and you're like, oh my gosh, I need all this extra income. Mike, are we on plan, ahead of plan, or behind on plan? And I'll look at it and I'll say, Eric, guess what? We're ahead of plan a little bit. What do you mean? Well, when we first sat down a bunch of years ago, this was the amount that we thought you'd have at the end of your life expectancy. But the markets cooperated. The investments got some good traction during that time frame. We're actually better than we thought when we met a few years ago. What I would do in that situation is I would take where we had the most growth, I would take that out of there and move it into your short-term spending bucket and say, hey, does that suffice? Did that make up for all the, pajamas and cradles and toys and gadgets and strollers and baby-proofing of the house? Was that enough? Yeah, Mike, I think so. So you put it perfectly, because we talked about building a building that can't sway in the wind. That's exactly what that is, right? Things change. Things need to be a little bit flexible. And that's how I would go about that. I would take from something that was over-targeted or did better than we expected and move it into your short-term spending. Had the years not been there, Eric, I'd say, okay, let's just keep plodding along. We didn't have the results we wanted to, Eric, but just, the spending is a little ahead of schedule, but we'll make this work. And you just kind of wait it out. Eventually the market, I can't promise it is, we don't know, but eventually the market has a way of getting itself around the corner, right? Getting itself back to where it was. We saw that this year. I keep talking about it, but we did. So that would be the technique. It's not like you would just call us once every 5 years. We're talking about this. This is a dialogue. This is a relationship, because we're working together on your retirement. We got you to retire. Now we're going to hold hands as masculinely as we can.
Absolutely.
I'm holding your hand, brother. I'm taking you through this. It's not like we're done now. Yeah. This is where we have to be a good Sherpa. We have to be a good guide for our clients. And that's really what we like when they lean on us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So what's next after that?
Well, we kind of talked about all the moving parts in distribution mode all at once. And obviously you brought up the really important thing is, as long as when we prepared for this, we had our arms around all those expenses. That's important. And you brought up a good variable, and not to go off topic, but our software does a very good job at keeping track of variables. Like, I had this spending this year that was unexpected, Mike. We're totally flexible and dynamic with that. So that's not a problem. The issue is, a good advisor would not let you make the jump into retirement if you could control it. In other words, some people just get terminated, right? They get fired, and that's that. But if it's something that you can control and say, Mike, I want to work till I'm 65 and I'm only 60. Can I retire now? Well, a good advisor would say, it's on the bubble. I wouldn't do it yet. Or wait. So there's a lot of pre-work that goes into the accumulation mode to get us to a point when we're in distribution mode, when we're finally retired, and when we are living on our investments, and when we do have those silos or buckets or investment strategies built every 5 years in sequence. So if we do the right planning ahead of time in the accumulation mode, the distribution mode should have a buffer, and that buffer gives us the flexibility to do things like you were saying, Eric, be able to give my grandkids more holiday presents and stuff like that. So there's a lot of flexibility built into it. I kind of didn't want to make today's podcast really mundane and go over like this step, that step, this step. It's more conceptual, right? It's like the spaghetti at the wall kind of process. So I just want to give people a glimpse into what distribution mode is and then how we line up the investment strategy, I think differently than most.
Yeah. I like the 30,000 foot view, and I'd even call it more like a 5,000 foot view. That you've really given some good specifics here. But I do have another question for you. When it comes to, and we talked about the grandkids, that's an unforeseen in a lot of ways. I mean, maybe you know that they're trying to have children, and so you can kind of begin to plan for that. But sometimes they're just, it's a surprise out of the blue. But we know that there are going to be certain expenses, right? If you're living in your home, just starting your retirement, and you plan to live in that same home for the next 30 years, you're planning out to 95 or even 35 years, planning to 100. In that time, you're going to need a new roof. In that time, you're going to change vehicles a few times, most likely. When it comes to those types of expenses, I know that you help people with their budgeting on their monthly, how much they're going to spend every month. How are you taking care of those types of expenses? Is it something where you're like, okay, even though you're paying yourself every month and your car is currently paid off, we know this is probably going to last you 4 to 5 more years. Or behavior-wise, maybe they like a new car every 3 years. Just depends on the client. But let's say they're going to try to make that car last, for as long as possible. But we do need to plan out in about 5 years, you're going to need to purchase a car. And some people don't want to have any debt. Some people can take a payment and it's not a big deal. Some car companies are going to be offering 0% financing for 5 years. So that may be an option there. Or do you just suggest that you take from a specific bucket to pay for a car all at once, paid off so there's no bills? I mean, how do you handle those kind of things? Well,
it's very easy. Oh my gosh, dude, you threw so much at me just now. I don't even know where to begin.
Is there smoke coming out? Do I smell smoke?
Is that what that was all about? I think so. It smells like Taylor ham in here all of a sudden. Or as you guys call it, pork roll.
Ham.
But
What are you talking about? I call it ham.
It's Taylor ham. When you come out here, I'll introduce you to it. You'll never go back.
Spiral cut honey ham. All right, let's go.
Ooh, those are good too.
I know.
But it doesn't smell like that in here. Anyway, so going back to what you said. So if you're unsure whether you should lease the car or buy the car, it's really subjective to that spot in time, right? There could be fantastic, like you said, interest rates the car companies are offering, or maybe they're astronomical rates. So it's always going to go back to a conversation with your advisor, the person that's hand in glove with your financial plan, your retirement income plan, in our example today. And what I would say is we always tell our clients, we want to be your 411 and 911 call for anything financial. And they look at you and go like, what does that mean? And I said, well, in the olden days, right? You'd call 411 for information, and you still call 911 if there's an emergency. So I said, anytime you need information or if there's ever a financial emergency, pick up the phone and call us. So going back to your situation where you're thinking about buying a car or leasing a car or whatnot, look, our software is very sophisticated, and I don't know if we're doing this the first year you're retired or the 11th year you're retired. But what we would do at that point in time is say, okay, Eric, what do we think that car payment's going to look like? We're going to increase your expenses by this number. And that's all we would do. We would pop that in there, and it would forecast the rest of it out, and calculate everything the rest of the way out. And I'd say, okay, buying this car today would cost you X at the end of your life expectancy. Or if we lease the car, we're talking about reducing your cash flow per month by this amount. The idea is that these are always things that pop up, right? You're not going to be able to drive hopefully, I would imagine people can't buy a car and, drive it for 30 years without some sort of difficulty. So these are the kind of things that do pop up. And our software handles it. And as advisors, we give really good insights as to the differences, the trade-offs. Do you lease it? Do you buy it? And then we can show you on paper how the numbers crunch out. Like I said, it calculates it out. And I'll say, Eric, buying that Cadillac this year, today, for making up a number, $45,000, will impact your retirement by $1.2 million. And you're like, oh my God.
Good
right?
Lord,
That's the reaction you get, right? But that's okay, because what you're taking is that money out of your plan, and then you see what's called the opportunity cost, right? What I'm giving up today to get something else. And that's what you're doing. Or what I get today, how does that take something away from me in the future? That's also opportunity cost. So that's what we like to sit down and work with you side by side, like I said, hand in glove. So there's no surprises. Mike, I should have never bought that Cadillac. It killed me for retirement. Well, had you bounced it off us, and if we're doing our job, we would say, don't buy that Cadillac, lease it, or maybe don't look at a Cadillac. But everyone's different. Everyone's situation's different. Where I'm going with this is the software that I use, and I pat myself on the back about this. I always try to bring in the best technologies available because my clients are IT people. They deserve it, right? And they know good software from bad software, quite frankly. So there's my reputation on the line. But we use really good software for this. And again, those one-offs. You use the example of a car. There could be a healthcare issue, right?
Yeah,
Mike, I needed an operation. I had to do this, or I needed to, you just did this, right? The roof on your house. So all those kind of things are big expenses. And like I said, when you retire, we leave a buffer. We make sure you have enough there because we know these things come up. Yeah. So good planning in the beginning of the accumulation mode all the way through to the distribution mode, it's a synergy. As long as you're retiring with enough assets to supplement your living expenses without getting over your skis. And again, life does throw curveballs, but a good plan is flexible. A good advisor will help you figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mike. Well, this has been a great podcast, as usual. I mean, I love talking about the subject. I love talking about planning and retirement, and the fact that you're able to help, even with those, a lot of people might consider small decisions. They're not small decisions because they're, like you said, there could be lots of ramifications, positive or negative. So I love the fact that you're there for the clients. I'm going to ask you at the end of this show for your contact information for anybody listening. But before we get to that, we do have our one special time together where you're going to gaze into that crystal ball of yours. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay.
Always.
Take a look.
I see hats. Lots and lots of hats.
Am I wearing those hats while I'm driving my new convertible Cadillac? No.
You could be. Or go this way, Johnny, behind door number 2. No, I'm saying hats because the weather's getting cold. So I'm going to be wearing hats.
You're right. Yeah. And thinking caps, they keep in the smoke. That's what I've heard.
Yeah. So I can't wait to get you out here to get you, some Jersey exposure to some good food, the Taylor ham that we talked about. You can bring a spiral ham. That's like a Midwestern-y thing, right? So we'll collaborate. We'll have a nice dish.
That would be great. All right, my friend. Thank you so much for your time today. And again, I want to ask you for your contact information for all those listeners that are interested in having this conversation with you.
Sure. And somebody yelled at me. They said, when you give the contact info out, we hear your name, Guarino, but we don't know how to spell it, which is problematic. True. But so it's Guarino and the word wealth.com, GuarinoWealth.com. So if they email me, Mike3@GuarinoWealth.com, be more than happy to go over retirement income planning, accumulation distribution, or just see if you're a good fit. See if you want to work with us. See if we want to work with you. We'd love to hear from you. Be awesome.
Yeah, no. You said Mike 3. Is that 3 the number or 3 spelled out?
3 the number. Sorry about that.
No.
Because I was the third and my father was the junior, and that created all sorts of chaos. So I just said, okay, my email is going to be Mike 3.
All right. That sounds good. All right, Mike. Yeah. Mike 3, I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Eric. Likewise.
You bet. And audience, of course, the last thank you goes to you. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Rewire and Retire podcast with Mike Guarino. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Mike comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at Guarino Wealth Management, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on the Rewire and Retire podcast. If you want to learn more about how we can help troubleshoot your financial and retirement strategies, click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Guarino Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Investing involves risk, including loss of principal. There is no guarantee that a diversified portfolio will enhance overall returns or outperform a non-diversified portfolio. Diversification does not protect against market risk. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor. Member FINRA/SIPC.
This is a hypothetical example and is not representative of any specific investment. Your results may vary.